The Duke of Alastair reviewed the final clause of the marriage settlement with the same dispassionate eye he used to inspect the lineage of a new stallion. The parchment was thick, the ink a definitive black. It was a document of acquisition, a deed of transfer, not for a person but for the land to which she was inconveniently attached. Blackwood Manor. Its ancient oaks and rolling pastures were legally bound to the hand of Alara Vance, the last of her line, and Alastair, whose own lands bordered that coveted estate, had determined it would be his. Mr. Hemlock, a solicitor so dry he seemed composed of parchment himself, cleared his throat. "And so, Your Grace, upon the solemnization of the marriage, control of the Blackwood estate and its revenues passes to you for the duration of your union with Miss Vance." Alastair dipped his quill into the inkpot, the scratch of the nib the only sound in the cavernous, book-lined study. He signed his name, Alastair Beaumont, with a flourish that was less an act of ego than one of finality. A problem solved, an asset secured. "There is, of course, the matter of the lady's own understanding of the arrangement," Mr. Hemlock ventured, his voice a rustle of dry leaves. "She has a certain attachment to the property." Alastair blotted the ink, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window overlooking a perfectly manicured London square. He thought of the woman he had met precisely once, a quiet, unremarkable creature with gray eyes and a stillness that might have been composure or simply an absence of anything to say. She was a key, nothing more, a key to unlock the gate to Blackwood. He pushed the document across the polished mahogany. She will have a title. She will have security. She will have the finest gowns and a seat at the most important tables in England. That is more than she possesses now. He paused, his voice dropping to a note of clinical finality, a statement of fact meant to brook no argument. "She will never hold this land. She is the conveyance, Hemlock, not the destination." The solicitor gave a slight, almost imperceptible bow of his head, gathering the papers. He understood. The Duke was acquiring a manor, and the wife was merely the unfortunate legal burden that came with it. Alastair did not think of her again for the rest of the day. He had secured his prize. The rest was mere formality. He did not consider what it might mean for a woman to be told her entire worth was contained within the soil she stood upon, only to have that very soil signed away from under her feet by a man who saw her as little more than a stubborn root to be dug up and discarded. He saw the map. He saw the borders. He did not see the woman at all. Alara Vance stood on the low stone wall that separated the formal gardens of Blackwood from the wilder meadows beyond. She did not need a map to know this land. She knew it by the shift of the wind through the lime trees, by the scent of damp earth rising from the riverbank, by the specific call of the kestrel that nested in the ruined West Tower. This land was not a collection of assets and revenues to her. It was a living chronicle, each field a page, each tree a word. It was the repository of her family's history and her own quiet, solitary life. She was not a fool. She understood the nature of the bargain her late father's convoluted will had forced upon her. To keep Blackwood, she had to marry. And not just any man, but a man of sufficient rank and fortune to satisfy the will's trustees. The Duke of Alastair, with his vast wealth and ancient title, was more than sufficient. He was overwhelming. When he had come to call, she had seen him for what he was, a force of nature, a man accustomed to command, to acquiring, to winning. He had been polite, his questions precise, his gaze sweeping over the manor's facade with the assessing eye of a general. surveying a fortress he was about to conquer. He had barely looked at her. She was a condition of sale, a line item in a ledger. Her companion, a sharp-witted and ferociously loyal cousin named Beatrice, had been outraged on her behalf. The man looked at you as if you were a piece of inconvenient furniture that came with the house. Alara had only smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips. Perhaps that is all I am. But as she stood on the wall, feeling the familiar grit of stone beneath her palms, she knew that was not true. She was not the furniture. She was the foundation. She was the stone in the wall and the water in the well. The Duke might believe he was taking the land from her, but she suspected the truth was far more complex. The land held onto its own. The wedding was a quiet affair, as befitted a union that was more merger than romance. Alistair found the entire process tedious. He stood at the altar and made his vows, his mind on a letter he needed to write regarding the purchase of a new timber tract in the north. He placed the cold gold ring on her finger and felt nothing more than the satisfaction of a contract sealed. She was, he noted with a flicker of detached interest, even paler and quieter than he remembered. Her gray eyes were vast and unreadable. She performed her part with a grave dignity that was, he supposed, appropriate. She did not weep, she did not smile, she simply was. Present, and she was not present. There and not there. Their journey to Blackwood was undertaken in his grand, well-sprung carriage. The silence between them is thick and heavy as the velvet squabs. He attempted conversation once. "I trust the journey is not too taxing for you, Duchess," he said, the new title sounding foreign and overly formal. She turned her head from the window. "Not at all, Your Grace. The roads are in good repair." Her voice was low and clear, without any of the fluttering uncertainty he associated with most women of her station. It was a voice that stated facts. He found he had nothing to add. He had made his statement. She had made hers. The conversation was concluded. He returned to his papers, and she returned to her window. He assumed she was looking at the passing scenery. He did not realize she was reading it, noting the state of the drainage ditches, the health of the tenant farms, the encroachment of gorse on a fallow field. She was coming home. He was arriving at a new possession. The staff at Blackwood were lined up in the entrance hall, a nervous assembly of familiar faces from Alara's life, now awaiting the judgment of their new master. At their head was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, a woman whose tenure at the manor predated Alara's own birth. Her face was a mask of stoic professionalism, but Alara saw the apprehension in the tight set of her jaw. Alistair stepped down from the carriage and strode into the hall, his presence sucking the air from the room. He was taller than any man there, his coat of fine dark wool a stark contrast to the faded livery and homespun clothes of the staff. He gave them a cursory glance, a king reviewing troops he had no interest in leading. "I am the Duke of Alistair," he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged space. "You will find me a fair master, so long as you are diligent in your duties. Your mistress, the Duchess, will communicate her requirements through Mrs. Gable." It was a dismissal. He turned, expecting to find Alara behind him, a silent, nodding accessory. Instead, she had walked past him and was now speaking quietly to the housekeeper. "Mrs. Gable," Alara said, her voice warm, "it is good to see you. I hope your sister's little one has recovered from his cough." A genuine, relieved smile broke through the housekeeper's stern facade. "He is right as rain, my lady. Your Grace, thank you for asking." Alara then moved down the line, a word for the butler, a question for the head groom about a specific mare, a nod to the kitchen maid who was twisting her apron in knots. She knew their names. She knew their families. She knew their lives. Alistair watched, a strange feeling prickling at the back of his neck. It was annoyance, he decided. This was inefficient. It was an unnecessary display of sentiment. The staff were employees, not relations. Yet he could not deny the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The tension had dissolved, replaced by a quiet, settled loyalty that was directed entirely at her. He had claimed ownership of the house, but she had just demonstrated that she was its heart. It was a small, insignificant detail. He dismissed it. The first point of contention arose within a week. Alistair, in his systematic way, had begun to review the estate's ledgers. He summoned his new estate manager, a man he had brought with him from his own ducal seat. "The timber in the North Wood is mature," Alistair stated, tapping a map. "Some of the finest oak in the county. We will begin felling at once. The profits will fund the new drainage system for the water meadows." The manager, Mr. Shaw, a man eager to impress his powerful employer, nodded vigorously. "An excellent plan, Your Grace. I will draw up the contracts immediately." That evening, at a dinner that was becoming a ritual of silent dining, Ilara spoke. "I understand you intend to fell the North Wood," she said. It was not a question. Alistair put down his fork, surprised. "I do. It is the most logical use of the asset. The North Wood acts as a windbreak for the entire valley," she replied, her tone perfectly even. "The soil on the upper slopes is thin. If you clear the oaks, the first winter storm will wash half the topsoil into the river, silting it up and flooding the very meadows you seek to drain." He stared at her. "And you know this how?" "My great-grandfather attempted the same thing in 1788, she said simply. "His journals are in the library. He recorded the ensuing disaster in meticulous detail. It took a generation for the land to recover." She picked up her fork. "The venison is excellent, Your Grace." He was floored. Not by the information itself, he would have to verify it, of course, but by the calm certainty with which she had delivered it. She had not argued. She had not pleaded. She had presented a fact, backed by historical precedent, and then changed the subject. She had corrected him as if she were pointing out a misprint in a newspaper. Alistair spent the next morning in the dusty, quiet library. He found the journals. It was all there, just as she had said. Page after page of spidery script detailing the folly of felling the North Wood, the cost of the erosion, the ruinous effect on the tenant farms. He felt a surge of irritation so profound it was almost startling. He had been made to look a fool, and by the one person he had mentally categorized as a non-entity. He had planned to conquer this land with logic and capital. He had not anticipated it would have a defender, least of all one armed with ancestral memory and inconvenient facts. He recalibrated. She was not merely quiet, she was observant. She was not merely still, she was watchful. It was a minor adjustment to his assessment, but a necessary one. It did not change the fundamental arrangement. It simply meant he would have to be more careful. A few weeks later, a packet of documents arrived for him from Mr. Hemlock. It was the final, consolidated account of the estate transfer, along with copies of their correspondence for his records. Alistair was occupied with a visiting magistrate and instructed his valet to place the packet on the desk in his study. The valet, being new to the household and eager to please, misunderstood. Seeing the Duchess arranging flowers in the morning room, a space adjacent to the study, he presented the packet to her. From London, Your Grace. For the Duke. Ilara took the heavy vellum packet. Thank you, Thomas. I will see he gets it. She placed it on a small side table, intending to give it to her husband when he was free. But the sender's name caught her eye. Hemlock and Son, solicitors. It was the architect of her fate. A morbid curiosity, a thing she had suppressed for weeks, stirred within her. She knew the broad strokes of the bargain, but the fine print had been denied her. Later that day, the house was quiet. Alistair had ridden out to inspect a distant tenancy. Ilara found herself standing before the table where the packet lay. Her hands were steady as she untied the ribbon. It was not her property. She knew that. But then, what was? Her life was no longer her own. Why should she respect the privacy of a letter that had defined its terms? She slid the papers out. Most were dense columns of figures, legal jargon that meant little to her. But then she found a letter, a copy of one sent from the solicitor to the Duke some weeks before the wedding. It was a summary of their final conversation. She read through the dry, technical language, her eyes scanning for the heart of the matter. And then she found it. A sentence, quoted for clarity, to confirm the Duke's own stated position. Regarding the bride's potential claims on the estate in her own right, I refer to your clear directive and proceed on the understanding that, in your own words, she will never hold this land. She is the conveyance, Hemlock, not the destination. The words did not strike her like a blow. They were colder than that. They were a key turning in a lock, a final, definitive click that shut a door she had not even realized was still open. There was no anger, no hot surge of fury or betrayal. There was only a profound, chilling clarity. She had known, in an abstract sense, that he did not value her. She had understood the transactional nature of their union, but she had not understood the depth of his contempt. Conveyance. It was the word that settled in her mind, a piece of ice in her heart. A thing used to move something of value from one place to another. An empty vessel. She folded the letter. Her fingers did not tremble. She creased the paper with methodical precision. Once, twice, 3 times, until it was a small, sharp-edged rectangle. She slipped it back into the sheaf of documents, placed all of them back in the envelope, and retied the ribbon with a neat, firm bow. She put the packet on the very center of his desk in the study. Then she walked out of the room. A door had closed inside her. It was a small, quiet sound, a sound no one else in the world could hear. But it was the most decisive sound she had ever made. The part of her that had hoped, that had wondered if kindness or companionship might grow in the stony soil of this marriage, was now locked away. She was a conveyance. Very well, a conveyance performs its function and then is empty. From that moment on, she would be empty. He had purchased the land. He could have it. But he would not have the woman who knew its secrets. He would not have her knowledge, her memory, her music, or her heart. He would have exactly what he had paid for, the shell of a duchess in an empty house. Alistair returned late, tired and irritable from his ride. He saw the packet on his desk, noted its pristine condition, and thought nothing of it. He untied the ribbon, glanced at the cover sheet, and, satisfied that all was in order, placed the entire bundle into a drawer, unread. He had no interest in reviewing the tedious details of a battle already won. The change was not immediate. It was too subtle for a man like Alistair to notice at first. He was not an observer of nuances, a reader of atmospheres. He noticed profits and losses, acres and yields. He did not notice the quality of a silence. The first thing he registered, perhaps a week later, was that his dinners had become entirely silent again. He had grown unconsciously accustomed to her brief, factual interjections, observations about the weather, a note on a book she was reading, a question about a political event mentioned in the paper. They were not conversations, not really, but they had served to punctuate the quiet. Now there was nothing. She was present, of course. She sat at the other end of the long, gleaming table, a perfect, still portrait of a duchess. She ate, or appeared to eat. She used the correct forks. But her eyes, when they happened to meet his, were smooth, gray, and utterly vacant. They were like polished stones. There was no one home. "Is the pheasant to your liking?" he asked one evening, driven by a flicker of unease he could not name. "It is perfectly acceptable, Your Grace," she replied. Her voice was polite. It was also completely devoid of inflection. It was the voice of a well-made automaton. He pressed, though he did not know why. "Shaw tells me the tenants in the West Quarter are concerned about the bridge." "Indeed," she said. He waited. Before, she would have known the history of that bridge. She would have known the name of the stonemason whose grandfather had built it. She would have had an opinion. Now, she simply lifted her wineglass to her lips. The topic was closed. He was an intelligent man. He registered the change as a data point. He simply did not know what to do with it. He assumed it was a fit of feminine pique, a mood that would pass. He had important matters to attend to. He could not be expected to manage his wife's humors as well as his estates. But the data points began to accumulate. He went to the library to consult a text on crop rotation. On the main reading table, he found a stack of books. They were texts on Italian art, on botany, on celestial navigation. They were her books. He realized he had not seen her in the library for weeks. The room felt different, no longer a shared space of quiet study, but just a collection of books gathering dust. Then there was the music. In the first month of their marriage, she had often played the pianoforte in the evenings. She was not a brilliant performer, but she played with a delicate, precise touch. The simple melodies, sonatas, and folk tunes had become part of the house's evening hum, a sound he had registered without ever truly listening to. Now the pianoforte was always closed. Its polished lid reflected the empty room like a dark, still pool of water. The silence it left behind was enormous. It was a hollow space where something used to be. He began to notice her absence in other ways. She was present, and she was absent. She was there, and she was not there. She took her meals in her room more often than not, a tray sent up on the pretext of a headache. When she did appear in the public rooms, she always had a book or a piece of embroidery in her hands, a shield against any potential interaction. She was a ghost in her own home, a beautiful, silent ship passing in a corridor. The household staff noticed, of course. They operated around her with a quiet, protective reverence. Her trays came back down with the food barely touched. Mrs. Gable's face grew more pinched with each passing day. The house, which had begun to feel like a home under Ilara's quiet influence, now felt like a grand, cold mausoleum. It was his house, officially, but it felt like her tomb. Alistair felt the change in the atmosphere. He mistook it for his own dissatisfaction. The acquisition of Blackwood had not brought him the triumph he had expected. The land was his, but it felt inert. His plans for improvement seemed to stall. The tenants were respectful but uncooperative, appealing to the Duchess for any minor dispute, an appeal she met with a polite, "You must speak to the Duke. He is the master here." They would then return to Alistair, dissatisfied, and the entire process would grind to a halt. He was the master, but he had no command. He was working in his study one afternoon, wrestling with a particularly intractable set of accounts that refused to balance, a task Alara's former steward had always handled with effortless grace. A quiet knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Gable, carrying a tray with a decanter and a single glass. This was unusual. "I thought you might need this, Your Grace," she said, her voice neutral. She placed the tray on the corner of his desk, moving a stack of papers to do so. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," he said, not looking up. She did not leave. He could feel her presence, a solid, unmoving block of disapproval. Finally, he sighed and put down his quill. "Was there something else?" "It is the Duchess, Your Grace." His jaw tightened. "Is she unwell?" "She is perfectly well," Mrs. Gable said, and the words carried a weight of meaning that made them anything but reassuring. "Her health is excellent." She paused, then added, "It is the pianoforte, Your Grace. It has been closed for over a month now, and the dust cover has been put on." Alistair stared at her, uncomprehending. "The pianoforte? What in God's name was the woman talking about?" "She loved that instrument," the housekeeper continued, her gaze unwavering. "Played it every day since she was a girl. The house misses the music." He felt a flash of anger. This was absurd. His housekeeper was critiquing the state of his marriage through the metaphor of a musical instrument. "If the Duchess does not wish to play, that is her prerogative. I am very busy, Mrs. Gable." "Of course, Your Grace," she said, turning to leave. At the door, she stopped and looked back at him. "Some things, Your Grace, once broken, cannot be easily mended, and some things, once silenced, do not remember how to sing." She closed the door quietly behind her, leaving him in a silence that was suddenly, acutely, full of meaning. Silenced. The word echoed. He thought about the closed pianoforte. He thought about the untouched meals. He thought about the vacant, polished stone eyes of his wife. He thought about the library, now just a room with books. He thought about the change in her. He was a man of logic, a man who believed in cause and effect. There was an effect here, a profound one. What was the cause? He tried to pinpoint the moment the change had begun. He sifted through the preceding weeks in his mind, searching for a specific event, a confrontation, an argument. There was nothing, only the seamless, silent withdrawal. It had been a gradual freezing, a slow retreat of the tide, leaving a barren, empty shore. He stood up and began to pace the study. He felt like a fool, grappling with an equation where all the variables were unknown. He had everything he wanted, the title, the land, the house, yet he possessed nothing. He had won the war and lost the peace. He had acquired the territory, but the population was in silent rebellion. His gaze fell upon the drawer where he had put the packet from Hemlock. On a sudden, inexplicable impulse, he pulled it open. He took out the thick vellum envelope, its ribbon still neatly tied. He had never read the contents. He had not needed to. He had known what it contained, confirmation of his victory. He untied the ribbon, the same neat bow Alara's fingers had made. He spread the papers on his desk, the columns of figures, the legal clauses. It was all as he expected. Then he saw it, the copy of the letter from Hemlock to him. He picked it up. He read his solicitor's dry prose, and then he read his own words, quoted back at him. "Why, she will never hold this land. She is the conveyance, Hemlock, not the destination." The world stopped. The air in the room became thick and hard to breathe. The ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece was like a hammer striking an anvil. 1, 2, 3. He saw it all in a single, blinding flash of understanding. The valet handing her the packet, the neat, retied bow, the precise date the music had stopped, the exact moment the light had gone out of her eyes. She had read it. She had read his cold, clinical, contemptuous dismissal of her entire being. And she had not screamed. She had not wept. She had not confronted him. She had simply agreed. She had accepted his definition of her, a conveyance, an empty vessel, and she had become one. She had emptied herself of everything that was her knowledge, her wit, her music, her spirit, and had left him with only the shell he had bargained for. It was the most devastating, complete, and elegant revenge he could possibly have imagined. It was a checkmate delivered so quietly he had not even known he was playing a game. He sank into his chair, the letter still in his hand. The paper felt heavy, like a stone. He looked at his own words, written in the solicitor's neat script. They were the words of a fool. The words of a blind, arrogant fool who had mistaken a diamond for a piece of glass and treated it accordingly. He thought of her correcting him about the North Wood, her quiet competence. He thought of her walking down the line of servants, her gentle authority. He thought of the simple music that had filled the house, a thing he had taken for granted, like the air. He had owned all of it, and he had thrown it all away for the sake of a few hundred acres of dirt. No, that wasn't right. He had not thrown it away. He had murdered it. He had taken a living, breathing thing and systematically, through sheer, willful ignorance, suffocated it. The silence of the house was no longer a mystery. It was an accusation. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, what he had to do. This was not a problem that could be solved with money or power. This was a wound that required a different kind of remedy. He had to find her. Not the Duchess, not the conveyance. He had to find Alara. He found her, not in the drawing room or her bedchamber, but in a place he had never bothered to visit. The old, neglected conservatory at the far end of the West Wing. It was a skeletal structure of iron and glass, most of its panes cracked or missing, its interior a riot of weeds and overgrown, long-dead vines. But in one corner, a small section had been cleared. The glass had been painstakingly cleaned. Inside, on a rough wooden bench, were a few terracotta pots nurturing tiny, fragile green shoots. She was there, on her knees, a trowel in her hand, her back to him. She wore a simple gardening apron over her dress, and her hair had come loose from its pins, a soft strand catching the weak afternoon light. She was tending to a small, struggling rose bush she had evidently rescued from the wilderness. She did not seem to hear him approach. She was entirely focused on her task, her touch on the plant, gentle and sure. He watched her for a long moment. He saw not the silent Duchess or the empty conveyance, but a woman engaged in a quiet act of creation, of nurturing life in a place of decay. She was not empty at all. She had simply moved all of her life, all of her care, into a space where he could not reach it. "Alara," he said. His voice was rough. She did not startle. She finished tamping down the soil around the rose bush before she slowly rose to her feet, wiping her hands on her apron. She turned to face him. Her expression was calm, polite, and utterly impenetrable. It was the face she wore at dinner. "Your Grace," she said, "did you require something?" The chasm between them felt a mile wide. He was holding the letter from Hemlock in his hand. He had meant to show it to her, to use it as a starting point. But looking at her now, He knew it was the wrong move. The letter was a monument to his failure. It was not the issue. He was the issue. He let the paper fall from his fingers. It fluttered to the damp flagstones, a small white surrender. "I was wrong," he said. The words felt inadequate, grotesquely small for the magnitude of his error, but they were the only place to start. She tilted her head slightly, her gray eyes watchful. There was no flicker of surprise, no hint of triumph, just a quiet, patient waiting. He took a breath. This was harder than negotiating a treaty or addressing Parliament. "I was wrong about you, about this marriage, about everything." He gestured vaguely at the conservatory, at the house beyond, at the land. "I saw this as a transaction, an acquisition. I saw Blackwood as a prize to be won, and I saw you as a part of the contract, a legal necessity." He finally met her gaze, forcing himself to hold it. "The word I used," he said, his voice dropping. "The word in that letter, conveyance. It was arrogant and cruel and unforgivably blind. I looked at you, and I did not see you. I did not see a person at all." He paused, the silence stretching between them. She did not speak, did not offer him any absolution. She simply waited, letting his words hang in the cool, damp air. He realized she was making him do the work, all of it. "I understand now," he continued, the realization unfolding even as he spoke it. "Your silence, the music stopping. It wasn't an act of anger, it was an act of integrity. I told you what you were, and you held me to it. You gave me exactly what I asked for. An empty house, a silent partner, a title without a person." He took a step closer. "I am asking you to teach me how to see." It was not the apology she might have expected. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was a confession of blindness, an admission of a fundamental flaw in his perception. For the first time, a flicker of something, not warmth, but life, moved in her eyes. It was a spark of the old intelligence, the watchful observer. "See what, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice still quiet, but with a new edge, a hint of steel. "The land? The ledgers? The value of the timber in the Northwood?" It was a test. He knew it. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I know how to see those things. I need you to teach me how to see you." He looked at the tiny green shoots in her pots. "I need you to teach me what is worth nurturing." He did not ask her to come back. He did not ask for her love or even her companionship. He asked for instruction. He had, for the first time in their acquaintance, positioned himself as the student and her as the master. He had ceded his power, not over the land, but over the terms of their existence together. She looked at him for a long, searching moment. He stood before her, the great Duke of Allister, stripped of his arrogance, his face etched with a genuine, painful understanding. He was not asking for a truce. He was asking to begin again from a place of truth. She turned back to her rescued rosebush. With a dirt-smudged finger, she gently touched a new, tender leaf. "This conservatory," she said, her voice soft but clear, "will require a great deal of work. Many of the glass panes are broken. The frost will kill the new growth if they are not replaced before winter." It was not an acceptance. It was not a rejection. It was a condition, a task, a beginning. "I will see to it," he said, his voice filled with a relief so profound it almost broke him. "I will have the glaziers here tomorrow." "They must be careful," she added, her eyes still on her plants. "The ironwork is old and delicate." "I will tell them," he promised. "I will supervise them myself." She nodded, A small, almost imperceptible gesture. It was enough. It was more than he deserved. He had come to the conservatory to find a ghost, and he had left with a set of instructions. It was a start. That evening, for the first time in over a month, she joined him for dinner. The silence was still there, but it was a different quality of silence. It was not the dead, hollow silence of absence, but a watchful, waiting silence, a space for something new to grow. The next day, as promised, the Glaziers arrived. Alistair was there to meet them, the fallen letter from his study, now a charred piece of ash in the fireplace. He spent the entire day in the cold conservatory, not directing, but watching, learning the delicate structure, ensuring the workmen treated the old iron with the respect it deserved. Ilara did not appear, but he knew she was aware. The whole household was aware. The Duke was spending his days in the ruined greenhouse. A week later, Lord Fitzwilliam came to call. He was Alistair's cousin, a man whose ambition was matched only by his lack of scruples. Fitzwilliam had also coveted Blackwood and had been furious when Alistair had secured it through marriage. He found Alistair in the now repaired conservatory, examining a new section of shelving the carpenters had just installed. "Good God, Alistair," Fitzwilliam drawled, looking around the space with a sneer. "Have you taken up horticulture? I thought you acquired this pile to manage it, not to play at being a gardener. Or is it that your new duchess has you fetching and carrying for her?" Alistair turned slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked at his cousin, at the man's smug, entitled face, and he saw a reflection of the man he himself had been only weeks before. "The Duchess, Fitzwilliam," Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is teaching me the difference between ownership and stewardship. It is a lesson you would be wise to learn, though I doubt you have the capacity for it." Fitzwilliam flushed. "Stewardship? You married the plainest mouse in the county for this land, and now she has you potting plants? The whole of London is laughing. They say you bought a title for a woman who has given you no air, no wit, and no conversation. A barren bargain all around." Before Alistair could move, a voice came from the doorway that connected the conservatory to the house. "He is right about one thing, Your Grace." Ilara stood there. She was dressed simply, but she wore her dignity like a crown. She walked into the conservatory and stood beside her husband. "It has, until now, been a barren bargain," she said, looking not at Fitzwilliam, but at Alistair. Her gray eyes were clear and direct, but a bargain can be renegotiated. Then she turned her gaze to the sputtering lord. "Lord Fitzwilliam, my husband, is a busy man. He is restoring my conservatory. I am restoring my husband. Both are delicate operations that require concentration and a distinct lack of pests. Good day." It was a dismissal so absolute, so elegantly devastating, that Fitzwilliam was left speechless. He gaped, turned a mottled shade of red, and retreated without another word. Alistair looked at his wife. He saw the woman from the first day, the one who had corrected him about the North Wood. The wit was not gone. It had merely been withheld. "I am restoring my husband," he repeated softly. He felt a smile, a real one, touch his lips for the first time in months. "Is that what you are doing?" "Perhaps," she said, a faint, challenging light in her eyes. "It depends entirely on whether the subject proves worthy of the effort." The rebuilding was a slow, quiet process. It was not a matter of grand gestures, but of small, sustained acts of attention. He learned to listen. He would bring her reports from the estate, not for her approval, but for her opinion, and he would sit and truly hear her response. He learned the names of her plants. He learned the history of the families who had lived on this land for centuries. He learned that her silences were not empty, but full of observation. He did not ask her to play the pianoforte, but one evening he had it tuned. The next day he left a new book of sheet music, a collection of simple Irish folk melodies he had heard her hum once, on the music stand. He did not know if she would play. He went to his study and left the door ajar. For hours, there was only the ticking of the clock, and then, hesitant at first, like a spring thaw, a simple, clear melody began to drift through the house. Section. It was not a sonata. It was not a performance. It was the sound of a conversation beginning. He did not go to her. He sat in his chair and listened, and the cold, hollow space inside him began to fill with a warmth he had never known. They worked on the estate together. Her deep knowledge and his strategic mind proved to be a formidable combination. The tenants, seeing the Duke and Duchess acting in concert, respectful of one another's strengths, found their own loyalty and diligence renewed. The land, which had felt inert and resistant under his sole command, began to thrive. It responded to their joint care. The harvest was plentiful. The rents were paid. The bridge was repaired. One afternoon she found him in the library, poring over the old journals of her great-grandfather. He was not looking at the accounts of the failed timber harvest. He was reading the man's descriptions of his wife, his love for the land, his hopes for his children. He loved this place, Alistair said without looking up, as if she had been in the room with him the entire time. He saw it as a legacy, not an asset. He did, Alara said, coming to stand behind his chair. I have a ducal palace, he said, his voice thoughtful. It is grand and cold and perfect. It is a symbol of power. But this, he gestured to the room, the world outside the window. This is a home. It has roots. I have spent my whole life acquiring things, Alara. I never understood what it meant to belong to a place. He turned in his chair to look up at her. The land held on to you, he said, the words a realization. And you held on to it. I tried to separate you, and in doing so, I almost lost everything. She placed a hand on his shoulder. It was the first time she had initiated a touch that was not a mere formality. His heart hammered in his chest. The land did not choose between us, Alistair, she said softly, using his name for the first time. It was waiting for both of us. That night, he did not retire to his own wing of the house. He came to her rooms. He did not come as a duke demanding his rights, but as a man asking for admittance. He knocked on the door that connected their chambers, a door that had remained closed since their wedding night. She opened it. She was in her dressing gown, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was not a conveyance. She was not a duchess. She was Alara, and she was beautiful. I love you, he said. It was the simplest and most profound truth of his life. I am in love with the woman who grows roses in a ruined conservatory, who knows the history of every stone in this valley, and who silenced a duke with her silence. I love you. She did not answer with words. She simply took his hand and led him into her room, closing the door behind them. The bargain was renegotiated. The contract was sealed, not with ink and parchment, but with a touch, a look, a shared future. A year later, the Duke of Alistair stood on the stone wall where Alara had stood on the eve of her wedding. The conservatory behind him was now a lush, green jewel box filled with blooming roses and exotic plants. The North Wood stood tall and proud on the horizon, its oaks protecting the valley as they had for centuries. The manor, once a silent, cold possession, was alive with the sounds of a thriving household. He was watching his wife. She was walking through the meadow, her hand resting on the small, gentle swell of her belly. She was pointing out something to the child within, a kestrel soaring overhead, perhaps, or the way the wind moved through the tall grass. Mrs. Gable came to stand beside him, a comfortable silence between them. "The land is happy, Your Grace," the old housekeeper said. Alistair nodded, his eyes never leaving his wife. "I was a fool, you know. I thought I could take it from her." "The land was never hers to give, Your Grace," Mrs. Gable replied wisely. "Nor yours to take. It belongs only to itself. It just chooses who is fit to care for it." He watched as Alara turned and smiled at him, a true, radiant smile that reached her eyes and lit up the world. He smiled back. He had come to Blackwood seeking to conquer a piece of earth. He had declared that she would never hold the land, but he had been wrong. The land had held on to her, and in holding her, it had caught him, too. He was not its master. He was, like her, its devoted steward. And he had, at last, come home.